All right, we're live. Welcome everyone to High Performance Pilots Roundtable. We're really excited to put on this webinar for you, and we hope that you learn one or even a number of interesting things about ForeFlight from this webinar. Unlike some of our previous webinars over the past couple weeks, this one's going to be a little bit different. So rather than a straightforward presentation or using only a slide deck, this is going to be a little bit more of a discussion, thus the roundtable moniker. So we've gathered a number of pilots, of jet pilots, who can talk about how they use ForeFlight as part of their daily routine for planning and flying, and how it helps them just perform their jobs a little bit easier. So on this call, we have Brent Halavity. He is one of ForeFlight's customer success team members, and he flies for a Part 135 operation. He flies a King Air 350, a Phenom 300, and a Hawker 800. We have Josh Pavo, who is a contractor with ForeFlight. He flies a Challenger 605 and 650 for a Part 91. Liz Bednar is also on ForeFlight's customer success team. She flies a CJ4 for a Part 91 operation. And Tom Gallagher, who is also with ForeFlight, flies a CJ3 Plus, also for a Part 91. From outside of ForeFlight, we have Dave Wilson. He flies for Boeing's corporate flight department, and he flies a BBJ and a Challenger 650. And then we have two gentlemen from FlexJet, Mike Motsis and Tim Monty, and both of them fly Global Expresses. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we kick this thing off. You can ask questions via the Go to Webinar message panel on the right. You just have to click that little question mark button, and it opens up the panel, and then you can type in any questions you want to pose to us, and we'll respond to them. Unlike some of our previous webinars, we will be responding to questions during the main portion of the presentation, just depending on when it makes sense. If an interesting question comes up and it pertains to the discussion we're having at that time, then we may go ahead and address it. And otherwise, we will collect a number of interesting questions and answer them during the Q&A at the very end. So I would definitely recommend that if we're talking about something and you have a question that is related to that, please go ahead and pose it to us right then and there, because we may end up answering it right away. The session is being recorded, and afterwards you'll get a link to view it again if you want to. And we'll also send out an email containing some resources that you can use to learn more about some of the things we talk about here. We definitely won't be able to go into as much detail as you'd maybe need to go and get started with some of these things yourselves. So that's going to be the purpose of that follow-up email. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me get my screen set up here. All right, so you should now be seeing my iPad screen running ForeFlight. And I'll go ahead and kick it off with this question. How do you start a new flight plan in ForeFlight? This is something that we've posed to some of our customers a number of times, and it usually comes down to whether someone starts a flight plan on the maps view versus on the flights view. And so there's a number of different reasons you might start from each of those places, and often you'll end up in the other place at some point. But I want to start by posing that question to Brent. Brent, what's your workflow for starting a new flight plan?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. First of all, good to be here with everybody, and good to be in company with such great pilots that are enabled and using ForeFlight currently. But typically, I like to start a flight plan from the maps page. The maps page gives you the opportunity to look at, any pertinent weather and TFRs, airmets, signets from a from a broad view over the entire country or world, for that matter, with ForeFlight here. And then from there, I like to use the flight plan edit window. So at the top of the screen, you see that we have the FPL tab. And from the FPL tab, this is where I like to start my flow. I start a top to bottom, left to right typical flow, starting with the aircraft tail number. So we'll select that tail in the top left-hand side. And then we'll scroll down from there, continuing from our performance characteristics down to the altitude advisor or a altitude we may want to select. And then I'll slide across from bottom left to top right, and we'll select any procedures, departures, or arrivals we would use. We can use the route editor to find a proper route for us, and then select an estimated time of departure so that ForeFlight can find forecasted temperatures, winds, and any pertinent weather for the flight from that point. Continuing from there, after the estimated time of departure has been established, we see that the little suitcase is just below that. The little suitcase is the pack feature, and the pack feature is what we need to use before each flight. It makes sure that all of our charts, weather, NOTAMs, any other information for the flight will be ready for offline use whenever we're up at altitude without internet connection. Continuing from there, we see at the endpoint there is the box with the little up arrow out of it. This is called the Send To feature. The Send To feature can be used within ForeFlight and many applications and features, and allows us to send all of the data that we just planned from the maps page directly over to the flights page, so we don't have to enter any of that data twice. As we can see, Sam has just demonstrated for us there. So basically all the information that we planned from the maps page, giving us a visual representation of our entire flight and what we've, what we're expected to do. Now we get to see the textual format of that planned flight.
Yeah, so that's a perfect summary of that workflow where you'd start on maps and head to flights. Generally, I mean, if you're going to file a flight plan, you obviously have to send it to flights at some point, but depending on how you prefer to do things, some people would want to just outline the very basics of the flight plan on the maps view and then add in additional detail on flights. But as Brent was saying, it can also be helpful to just plan almost the entire flight plan here and then send it to flights, because then at that point you really don't have to send it back to the map until you actually get to take off. Now, Josh, you mentioned that you actually do it in the opposite direction, where you start on flights and then send that flight plan to the maps view. So do you want to offer an explanation of how and why you do that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. So I usually start on the flights page, and for me, it's just a little bit easier because I find that I can get much of the same information, but tune it a little bit more for what my personal preferences are for the flight. So on the case of the flights page, I start off by entering a departure airport. In this case, looks like Sam has Baltimore set up, which is a perfect airport to use. For the destination, we have New Orleans set up. And at this point, we can press on the alternate field and we can pick an alternate airport. As it populates here with the retrieving alternates, what it allows us to do is we can view the weather at the airport, what kind of approaches it has, what kind of runway distance we're talking about. And once we find one that we like, we can just select, in this case, add KNEW as the alternate. And that's going to put it automatically onto the flights page. Looks like Baton Rouge is what you've selected, and that works as well. And if we decide that we want a second alternate or a takeoff alternate, that too is an option. Most of us in the US, we're probably not going to define either one of those at this point. For the estimated departure time, we can set it whether it's, an hour from now is usually a good starting point if we're going to be doing a flight planning right away. And then from the aircraft, some of us will have multiple profiles, so you can select the aircraft line, which allows us to choose which aircraft we're going to be using. The G550 works great for the purpose of this. So we can just press our back button go back to our flights page. And assuming the Mach decimal 85 profile works, as a reminder, our ForeFlight performance profiles are included for AFM profiles. So anything that's in the AFM for a cruise profile, you should find a corresponding ForeFlight profile. And again, it's simply AFM data. My experience has been in the Challenger, data is extremely accurate if you fly the climb profile, cruise profile, and descent profile as depicted in the AFM. Obviously, any variations from that will probably show as a variation in time and fuel burn in ForeFlight as well. Going back to our flights page, I think most of us at this point are going to be flying IFR, so we'll leave that as it is. Then we go ahead and press the routes button. Here we can see we have 8 possible routes. And once we pull that, our route advisor comes up. Give it here just a second to do that. And on the route advisor, we're able to see weather as well as the proposed routes. So our recommended route in this case is a route that is optimized for air traffic control, it's optimized for time, and is optimized for fuel. So typically I choose the recommended route, pressing the select route button, and that takes us again back to the flights page. And we can either update the altitude or we can ignore it. In this case, we've accepted flight level 470 for our cruise altitude. You see on the top, we recompute the flight plan for this route, this cruise profile, descent profile, climb profile. And we're coming in at 2 hours and 19 minutes with a burn of 6,663 pounds. Pretty strong headwind of 78 knots. And again, now we scroll down and we can designate our payload, whether it's people on board or our cargo. So Sam, let's put on, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here and point out that once you get to this point, the payload and the fuel and all that, these are fields that are only available in our performance packages. So if you're an individual, that's Performance Plus, or if you're a business customer, we have Business Performance. But essentially, once you get to these fields, it's these in combination with that aircraft performance profile that Josh was talking about that allows ForeFlight to really accurately compute the performance information. So if anyone's not seeing these fields on their device, that's probably why.
Thanks, Sam. So let's go ahead and put a few people on board as well as a little bit of cargo. Whatever you choose will be fine, Sam.
And in this section, when we choose the people on board, the number count there, people on board will also populate the souls on board in the ICAO flight plan. So we want to make sure this matches the total souls on board rather than, just the passenger count.
Yeah, that's a common question we get. Is it only passengers or doesn't include the crew? And yet it includes any human being on that flight.
And then for a moment, we'll talk about our fuel policy. And Sam, if you don't mind, why don't you pull up the various fuel policies so our viewers can get an idea for what options we have. So we have the minimum fuel required, which is quite literally the minimum fuel required plus your taxi fuel plus your reserves. If you have an alternate airport selected, then the fuel burn that was shown on our alternate advisor will be added to this profile as well. Extra fuel is essentially if you want to carry a little bit of extra gas. A lot of times you might do that if you're going to be quick turning and you know that you want to land with enough to go to your next destination, be a good use. Maximum fuel is just as it sounds. It allows us to put the maximum amount of fuel that we can carry, not on the airplane, but or not the max on the airplane, I should say, but the maximum amount of fuel that our payload allows us to take. So in some airplanes, there'll be a big difference. In others, there'll be quite a small difference. Everything that we're talking about, all the fuel policies, including fuel at landing, can also be edited on the flights page. So Sam, if you won't mind editing the landing fuel to say be 15,000 pounds, then we'll see that our fuel policy automatically changes to the landing fuel policy. Perfect. As we keep scrolling down, now we have a quick review of our weights, everything from zero fuel weight to our ramp weight, taxi weight, takeoff weight, and our landing weight at our destination.
Hey, Josh, Just one thing I could add in there, if you don't mind. On the weights there, we did have the manual fuel weight as well, which I saw, and some people like to put their, if they come in and they have a block fuel or amount of fuel that's already on the aircraft, we can select that fuel policy, select the manual, and then enter the exact same fuel amount that we're seeing from the, that's being depicted from the aircraft itself. And then it will give us our fuel readouts from that point, given our current block fuel.
Yeah, it's a great point, Brent. And then under destination services, this is something I find particularly useful. Once you've set an FBO and the fuel order tab as well, that allows us to be connected through Jet Fuel X. We can send a fuel release to the FBO within ForeFlight, and it really helps a lot for essentially using just ForeFlight Mobile to get quite a few of our needs set up. Thanks, Sam. And flight log is something that some people find very useful for noting your block in, block out, and takeoff time, landing time, as well as your fuel at shutdown. And just like Brent was explaining earlier, we can pack just like you can from the maps page, pack for the flight. And essentially that gives us everything that we're going to need to take that flight offline once we're in the air. And in conclusion here, we can scroll back up to the top of the flights page. We get our nav log, our briefing, any files we may have included on the trip. Some people like putting passenger itineraries, crew itineraries, and anything essentially that you might relate to the actual flight that you're going to be flying on that leg. Then from here, we can file a flight plan and depart on the flight.
So Josh, I suppose at that point, once you filed the flight plan, that is when you would then send it back to the maps view, just so that you have it loaded up there.
Exactly. I typically do that once in the cockpit because for me, I use the refresh button on the top of the screen, right before closing up to get any last minute computations, because one of the things that we do with an aircraft profile is that we're able to compute our maximum weights for altitudes. So if a new wind and new temperatures come out and say on this flight, we're now unable to do flight level 470, we'll automatically in our nav log, we'll be reduced to say flight level 430 in this case due to temperature. So it's a last minute step for me is recompute and send to maps.
Yeah, we have an interesting question here related to the recommended route that you talked about earlier. The question from Brian is, does the recommended route take into account the temperature and winds data? And does it recommend an altitude for crews using that data as well? So put another way, what variables does the algorithm actually calculate when it's recommending a route and an altitude?
So a recommended route is essentially factoring three things pretty heavily. First is the chance that you'll actually be able to fly that route from an ATC perspective. We typically will not recommend a route unless we are, at least say 90% confident that it's a route that you're actually going to be able to be cleared as filed when you go to get your clearance. Winds, temperature, time, fuel burn, all those are very much considered as well. And so our recommended route is a combination of all of those factors to give you the route that is possible to fly and efficient to fly.
Yeah, so that explains why in this case you can see that the recommended route suggested here is the same route as this first ATC cleared route, although the performance results are a little bit different. And I think that just comes down to, like you said, the recommended route is also suggesting a specific altitude, whereas ForeFlight may be using, so here it's using flight level 400 on this ATC cleared route to calculate the performance.
Exactly. So one is flight level 430, recommended is flight level 430, and the last cleared is flight level 400.
Yeah,
Sam,
go ahead.
Something I'd like to add, this is Tom. This can all be done either very in-depth or very quickly, which is one of the things I like about what's offered in the features. So, the night before your flight, or if you're sitting in the FBO, you can really get in depth with this. You can check a bunch of different things. You can look at your route, you can look at weather, but you can also file and build a flight plan pretty quickly, really within 30 seconds or a minute. Once you're pretty familiar with it, it's something that you can do real quick in the FBO. So generally, the way I like to do it is maybe the day before a flight, I'll get real in depth with it the night before, sitting at the hotel, go through a lot of factors, and then the next day you can kind of check everything again, then quickly build a flight file and go from there.
Yeah, and this is
That's
Brent.
that's a great point, Tom. I definitely agree with that. I often will flight plan the day before and then immediately before the departure, maybe fine tune a little bit. But if I want to create a flight very quickly, I can do it from my iPad or my iPhone. And within 45 seconds, I can have a flight planned, filed, and essentially print off the Nav Log briefing, be out the door.
And that's a good point too. Especially when you're at an airport, a lot of times it's going to be easiest to do this on your phone because you may not be in the FBO with Wi-Fi. So I'd encourage everyone to kind of get familiar with the flow of the flights page on your phone, just so you can do it pretty easily, especially if you're on a quick turn. You can land, get fuel, build your next leg, and then file it that way.
Yeah, just like Tom said, this is Brent again, that I've been able to, from within the cockpit in Durango, Colorado, have been able to file within 60 seconds after waiting on de-icing and holdover times to file a flight plan from my phone. And we were #1 in line, and we would have had to go back, and our holdover times would have ran out. And I was able to file, like I say, from my phone in 60 seconds. And the second that I hit the file button, ATC had already received it and told us that a new flight plan had appeared. So it's very useful in the cockpit.
Yeah, so now that we've already sort of moved on to talking about flight plan filing, I want to get into that topic a little bit more specifically, not only in the context of how easy it is, as you just said, Brent, how easy and fast it is, but there are a number of specific benefits beyond that you get when you file with ForeFlight. So a couple of those, and these are also available with our Performance Plus subscription plan, are PDC delivery, and also we have a support for delivering recall numbers as part of the Nav Log. So does anyone want to talk about one of those features? I know that some of you use one and some of you use the other. So maybe we can get some different viewpoints on what you value about each one.
I'll talk quick about PDC. So PDC is really useful for me. I'm a single pilot operation, so a lot of times I'm running around doing pre-flight, all kinds of things. So PDC will text you your clearance and a current ATIS for that airport. We've got about 70 airports nationwide that do that. So it's a great way to save time for me when I'm running back and forth to the FBO, paying for fuel, loading bags, all those things that we do as private pilots. 30 minutes before my departure, I get texted directly to my phone, my clearance, and then also the full ATIS. So I can check the weather that way. I have the specific ATIS letter, so when I check in to taxi, I already have that. And it's just a real convenient time saver for me just to have it there, and then I can keep doing what I'm doing rather than trying to call clearance, trying to get the ATIS and all that stuff. An important thing to say though, speaking of calling clearance, sometimes when I get PDC, you can still call clearance, and I'll do that every once in a while to ask them a question. They still have it on record. So sometimes if you get a PDC and you have a question, just go ahead and call and clarify before you take off.
Also want to echo on the PDC clearance front, 2 advantages we've seen. One is both pilots are receiving the clearance at the same time via email, which reduces the human error from copying clearances down. From a controller, it's really easy to misspell. For instance, Roxy intersection can be ROXXY or ROXIE, something to that effect. Also, it's very visible if you are giving given a altitude restriction that varies from a SID, say stop at 6,000 versus 7,000. So it definitely reduces an amount of human error. The other item is on a workflow. You're at West Palm Beach, Teterboro, on some of these holidays or peak travel days where it is hard to get a word in edgewise just to simply get your clearance, and you have to wait in the back of the line to get the clearance. You've already got it. You can move right on to ground control and call in, say you have your clearance and you're ready to taxi. So there's a significant time savings there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. You might have gotten cut off at the very beginning, but that was Tim Monty from FlexJet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim. And you know, PDC, one thing that's worth mentioning about that is the fact that if you get PDC through ForeFlight, you still get the PDC through your FMS, and in addition to that, you receive PDC on text message as well as email. One feature that I have found very useful that ForeFlight brought in about 2 years back now is the ability to recall flight plans that we make in ForeFlight Mobile. And I think most on this call, or many of us anyhow, are probably quite familiar with recalling flight plans that we're either doing through Honeywell, AirInc Direct, or Satcom Direct if you're on their flight deck Freedom. And essentially this allows ForeFlight flight plans to be sent to our data link provider of choice. In the Challenger that I fly, we're using Satcom Direct. And once I've filed my flight plan on the Nav Log, I'm then presented with a recall number. And in that recall number, I enter my FMS, and we are getting the latest route that we have planned and filed with ForeFlight. Really handy feature, something, like I say, I use on every flight, and it's really reduces the probability of errors from so-called fat fingering our flight plans into our FMS, especially once they get pretty lengthy.
Josh, this is Mike Matzis with FlexJet, and I agree. The recall numbers are in a number of different locations, from the briefing email that you get from ForeFlight to the flights page. That real easy to get. Using the PDC, my workflow personally, especially on long flights in the Global Express, we receive the PDC clearance on our phones. We're able to verify that against the recalled flight in our FMS, and it saves about 10 minutes, 20 minutes worth of typing if you're doing a really long 10-hour flight. It's been a great, both features have been great additions.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the actual filing of the flight plan, if we could. And my experience with ForeFlight has been in Asia, North America, as well as Europe. Flight plan does support European filing, and I have had no issues at all using it. The routes have been very solid. We have Eurocontrol validation. So the routes that we are filing are routes that Eurocontrol has already essentially given the green light to, which works out really well. One of the tricks that I use domestically to file is I file the flight plan somewhere around 22 hours ahead of time. And what that allows me to do is I'm communicating to the FAA at that point that I intend to fly this route, and the flight plan is actually in their system, such that when an edict, expect departure clearance time program comes out, it's already a known demand. My flight plan is in the system, so I essentially get moved to the top of the list for edict issuance. It really reduces the delays that I've experienced. A lot of us probably have gone to Mexico in the middle of the holiday season and know that they run a program that's usually 40 miles in trail. So you can easily get a 4 to 6 hour delay at your departure point while you wait for your slot, so to speak, for arrival into Mexico. Some of the other flight planners are participating in a collaborative decision-making, CDM, and the difference between what we do and CDM is saying there's an airplane that plans to fly this trip. between San Diego and Cabo San Lucas tomorrow at 2, and its tail number is 123 Alpha Bravo. But no delay assignment is made off of that data. Once the flight plan is filed is when the delay assignment's made. So that's really helped me out on a number of flights to, like I say, to kind of get to the top of the list. And it's been a really great feature that separates ForeFlight from the other flight planners that I've used in the past.
I think I see a question here about does ForeFlight support DCL? And it does. The DCL feature works terrific. You can do that basically CPDLC on the ground in the US.
Yeah, on that topic, I'd like to turn to some of the questions now. Sorry to everyone who submitted them. You guys are really going nuts out there, and our support staff is doing their best to answer them, but they're having some trouble keeping up. So we will try to get to a few of these now related to what we've just been talking about. Someone said, can you show an example of where the recall number is found in the email briefing? So the recall number is included in the Nav Log specifically, which I don't believe that is typically emailed directly, but it is accessible right here from within ForeFlight. So it's down here at the sort of the bottom left under the summary and time section. Let's see, there was another question.
I've got a question about PDC.
Sure.
So PDC is difficult with multiple pilots flying multiple airplanes, with only one email allowed to be registered per aircraft. Is there any way around this?
Yeah, Josh, do you want to?
I think a ForeFlight call sign would be the solution to that, where if you're operating with a ForeFlight call sign, we're registering our PDC on that call sign, which essentially allows the PDC to follow that call sign. Brent, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so basically with a ForeFlight call sign, it's free with a Performance Plus subscription, and then you can, once we register, or you can sign up with us, just email us directly asking for a ForeFlight call sign. We'll assign a ForeFlight call sign to you specifically. This means that you can fly any tail, any registered tail you would like, but you would just include the call sign prior to your departure, and then the PDC will follow your call sign rather than your actual tail number. So you can have as many pilots as you want flying this one aircraft, or you could be flying a club airplane, or you could be flying a multiple tails within a flight department, and still be able to receive your own ForeFlight call sign and receive PDC in any aircraft across your fleet.
Yeah, that's something that we, a lot of people don't know about that ForeFlight does offer those call signs. So if you're in that use case where you have multiple people using the same aircraft, then that's an excellent way to solve that problem. We had some questions about PDC, so let me quickly touch on those before we move on here. Let me go through the list here. Well, I've lost them now. They're getting lost in the avalanche of questions coming in. Thanks everyone for being so engaged in this. That's really great to see. There was a question regarding filing to alternates. Here we go. Is there a way to define a route from the destination to the alternate airport? Josh, I'm sure you know what the answer to that is. So do you want to take that one?
Sure, be happy to. ForeFlight Mobile is not supporting a route to the alternate. However, ForeFlight Dispatch does. So that's a feature that thus far is only available in Dispatch. And it's something I know that a lot of our customers have spoken to, and we hear you loud and clear that it's a want.
Yeah, here's a quick look at the Dispatch interface. And so there is a there is an alternate routing option here, where once you have an alternate airport entered, you can select either manual routing or automatic routing, and ForeFlight will just come up with something from your destination to your alternate. So that is one of our features that's only available with dispatch.
And you know, Sam, while we're on dispatch, I see a question came in asking if ETPs are supported. And ETPs are another one of the features that are absolutely supported in dispatch. So any flight plans that are created in dispatch and are later what we call released to the crew, which simply means that the flight is sent to ForeFlight mobile of the crew, the ETP is then available on the Nav Log for those customers.
Yeah, and you can see it here within ForeFlight. This was a flight that was released from dispatch. And in addition to showing the ETOP circles there, it also has the special diversion planning section that includes that information. And the briefing also includes quite a bit of information about this as well. There we go. All right, so I want to move on now from flight planning and filing and talk a little bit about some of ForeFlight's in-flight features, and specifically how you guys utilize some of those features, combine them in different ways to really, customize the experience and adapt it to certain situations. So one of the key features that we've been looking at here is this Nav Log, which is something that you can print out and mark up as you want. So we actually have a number of different Nav Log formats, the standard format and the newer international format. So does one of you want to briefly speak about the differences between those and how you utilize them during a flight?
Yeah, I'd be glad to speak about them. So our standard Nav Log, or our ForeFlight default Nav Log, is sort of what most of the users maybe would consider our original Nav Log. And that is meant for those that are maybe annotating in the Nav Log a little bit less, not flying over water overseas. It's still a really useful Nav Log. It's just more of a Nav Log that most of us were accustomed to in the earlier days of ForeFlight. Some time back, we put some of the feedback we were getting from customers into what we are calling our international Nav Log. International Nav Log is the one that I choose to use on all of my flights, just because it gives me a little bit more of the data that I'm interested in, being more of a numbers person. Starting at the top of our international Nav Log, we have a clear place for our ATIS and our in-route clearance. For those that want a little bit more writing space, we also implemented some of those spaces in that next block below, where you can see there's quite a bit of writing room, both under the weight section as well as the info section. We've added our ramp RVSM altimeter checks that many of our customers were saying they really wanted to see. We've added block in, block out times, HOBS times for those that use them. And I think the section that I find the most useful, that really brought the previous Nav Log and put us into something today that I find great for over water flying as well, is we've left a lot of room in the waypoint section for writing fuel remaining, how much fuel you've used, your ETA at a waypoint, your ATA at the waypoint, any remarks you may have. It's suitable for marking up when you're oceanic. And it's for me, it's become sort of a one-stop shop for what I'm using going over, over the water. If we were to scroll down below the waypoint section, I know a question came up earlier in this webinar about the times and winds at different altitudes, and we're offering that as well. As we can see on the screen, we're essentially giving performance information for everything from 50320 to 50400, your wind component, and with 2 cruise profiles, both your plan profile as well as one other, what the difference in time and fuel burn would be. So you can see in parentheses, we're listing what the time difference is. And the one that's bolded is the one that we've chosen for this flight that we're going to be flying. Below that, we have a little section that's organized for our departure and destination frequencies, as well as runway lengths available. If we have our FBO selected under destination, it will also tell us the FBO name and the frequency for that FBO. And we also, on the bottom of that, we have a small airport diagram that's available. My preference is I use the Jeppesen charts for their actual airport diagram, but this is great for a quick view. Where is the FBO located relative to the runway that I'm landing on? I find it's a really quick reference in that case.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add, Sam and Josh, there is, sometimes we go to an airport where we don't have a printer available, so we want to annotate this, or maybe some people just don't like to print, they just like to use the iPad. Using the Send To tab up there on the top, you can send this directly to a air printer if it's available, or you can select the Save to ForeFlight Documents option right there. And then whenever we do that, now we can go to the Documents section and find this Houston to Oakland flight and open it from there. And we can annotate it from here, or if we want to save it directly to this flight, we can go back and use the Send To feature again to send it directly to the flights file from the flight that we're planning right now. And now whenever we go back to the flights page and we go back to the flight there, we see the files tab at the top of the option there. And now we're going to have our nav log available. And from here within the flight, we can tap here and we can annotate it from this point so that we can keep track of all of our fuel burns, our ATIS clearance, and any waypoint information we need along the way.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about the Files and Flights feature is that just like on the Documents view, you can annotate any file that gets put in here. So it's especially useful for marking things up during a flight. How about, let's briefly talk about some weather layer considerations. Obviously, that's where when you're in flight, you're going to be spending most of your time on the maps view. And so can any of you maybe talk about what combinations of map layers you prefer to use to get different sorts of information in different scenarios?
Yeah, so one that I really like to use, this is Tom, I like to use the flight category. So this is going to give you just a quick color reference for visibility and ceilings at an airport, whether you're VFR, whether you're IFR, or somewhere in between. I find that when I'm flying, usually when visibility is a concern, not so much with storms, this is a great way for me to get a big picture trend of what areas, if I'm thinking I might have to, divert, this will show me what areas I should be thinking, just as a big picture and for the trends that are out there.
Yeah, this is a great map feature. And another feature that I like to use here is the TFRs on the maps page. Just so whenever that I'm en route, let's say that we get down to low level and there's, especially during football season and as we move into, large gatherings of concerts and stuff that we typically don't look at, be flying to a unfamiliar airport, we can see that these TFRs will be available and visible, and this will be updated via if we have ADSB as well.
Yeah,
so one other one.
I was just gonna say not too many sports games going on right now, so you're not gonna see quite as much.
Yeah, if you scroll over to the Washington area, the main TFR will pop up.
Oh, sure, yeah.
There's one pop there. There you go.
There we go.
In the same light of this different screen, I don't know if you can quickly jump out, but to the nav log, I also found in the flight planning, a lot of people don't scroll down far enough in the Nav Log section. I'll wait for you to get over. Yeah. So scroll down. If you keep going past the ICAO flight plan, I don't know, is this to the bottom of the screen here?
Yeah, that's the bottom of this, but you're probably referring to once you get into the briefing, right? So
Yes, I'm sorry.
that
Yeah,
is one thing. I know that you use dispatch. So when with dispatch, the nav log is automatically included in the briefing. So that's where that confusion would come from. And
okay, and this is
note here. Sorry, this is the HTML briefing that we provide, the graphical briefing, but we also provide a PDF briefing, which is a different format and probably the one that Tim is more used to. So I might go switch that setting and regenerate this, but go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, that's right. We do use the PDF version more often. And maybe that's something that's a little hidden as you're going through and changing the options. I'll let you go through there. But the big value is there's a turbulence map for passenger comfort. One is a vertical cross section and one's a top down look. And so let him regenerate this. I just find that pretty valuable as you're looking at your route planning. You can make a determination, should I climb as quick as possible, or maybe there's a practicality in slowing the climb because there might be turbulence above you that you might want to climb out of. And well, here's a perfect example of a pretty poor day. If you could get higher than normal, the flight plan, you can see that a lot of turbulence can be avoided. It looks like getting through flight level 240, in this case, there's a little light blue, maybe getting up as quick as possible would be a good choice. And the other real value for those that are crossing the ocean, can you stay up on that other screen for just 1 second there, Josh? The tropopause line I find really valuable. If you're crossing, ForeFlight's going to plan a flight that certainly the airplane is able to do, that little red dash line. But this past winter, that tropopause, if you got up far enough, dipped as low as flight level 180 at times. And as we all know, you're cruising across the Atlantic and all of a sudden your performance degrades something significant. You'll see it in this chart that you're going to enter an area where the ISA is going to get pretty hot. So this is I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I'll tell you there's a lot of valuable information in this chart to just get you a quick look as to what your day is going to be. And in this case, and you were scrolling down, there's a lot of turbulence. So maybe going north or south would be a better idea. And in this case, you'll see that maybe if we went back and picked a more northerly route or something that took us a little further north would avoid a lot of this. And I don't know what everybody had, the customer base that is traveling, but some people are ultra sensitive with turbulence and don't mind flying, maybe even several hundred miles out of the way just to go around all this bumpiness. So that's it. I won't dwell too much on it, but I think these two charts are really valuable in the briefing tab.
Yeah, this is definitely not a flight that we would want to be conducting today, but it does serve as a good example of how severe turbulence appears in this briefing. One other thing I do want to point out regarding dispatch is that it also has this capability to show turbulence if, for example, when you're looking in the recommended routes view down here, if a given route has forecast turbulence at that altitude, there will be a little turbulence marker sitting right here, and that applies to every route that dispatch gives you. And so it's an easy way for a flight planner to quickly notice that a route is going to have, I think it limits it to moderate turbulence or worse, I think, but basically it's just a quick reference to show you that a route has expected turbulence, and so you probably want to look at something different.
Yeah, I noticed we had a question about flight sharing in the cockpit, and I think that's especially applicable to the audience of this webinar. Brent, would you be able to talk a little bit about flight sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways to do flight sharing from the cockpit. You know, we do have the send to feature, which allows you to send the flights to and from, you know, other users within ForeFlight. But then also a feature that I like to use to check my route prior to departure is if we go to the maps page and we tap on the up in the top right hand corner there, we see that we can search for a flight, a tail number, or a call sign. And whenever we type that in, we see that underneath the aircraft, we see the option for scheduled flights, which in this case, we're choosing Southwest Airlines flight 2201. And we can tap on that. And this pulls data directly from FlightAware. And FlightAware updates their information constantly with the air traffic control. So I usually try to check this within an hour prior to my departure. And I find that my expected route and, you know, my clearance that I received from ATC, you know, will typically differ from what I've actually filed. But if I check this within 1 hour prior to my departure, it's 95% been the actual routing that air traffic control gives me. So by tapping that, it loads it right into ForeFlight Maps page. We can send it to the flights, or we can review it right here so that we know exactly whenever they tell us that we're going to be leaving on the TERP 7 departure, flash transition, jet route 48 to ODF. You know, we can read all that back and plug it into our FMS prior to departure, and allowing us to, you know, it just gives you less margin of error from copying something down to entering it into the FMS. And you know, this is very useful at airports that don't have PDC. So if we didn't receive a PDC or a DCL from CPDLC, then this is something we can use at any airport across the country.
Yeah, was there anything more that anyone wanted to say about flight sharing? Because that is something that is available outside of just searching for a flight this way, although this is actually a very useful way to do it.
Yeah, Sam, if you want to use the send to feature, we can send this to our flights page. And then from the flights page, we can use the send to once again from here, and we can share those flights.
Yeah, if cockpit sharing was set up on this iPad and there were two iPads running ForeFlight, when we press send to, we would have an option to send it to, say, Josh's iPad or Brent's iPad. So I think to answer the question that was posed, essentially what I believe the user was asking is the best way to share flights in the cockpit. And I would say in general, that would be to use the cockpit sharing feature that we have built into the app, just like Sam is showing right here. So we press Sam Taylor's iPhone, and that flight is then sent from the iPad to the iPhone. And it works just as well iPad to iPad or iPhone to iPhone.
Yeah, and obviously you can't see my iPhone screen right now, but the pop-up telling me that, asking me if I wanted to accept this route appeared within about half a second of tapping it on the iPad. So it's an incredibly fast share system, and it loads up the entire route exactly as it is on the iPad. So yeah, if two pilots using ForeFlight are on the same Wi-Fi network, that is by far the fastest and easiest way to share it. We have a number of questions that have come in here, so I think we're getting close to our time. It's not a big deal if we go a little bit over, and so, you know, hopefully everyone will stick around and continue watching, but let's go ahead and check out some of these questions. Here's one. After you press file on the flight plan, when does the FAA see it? Is it 2 hours prior to departure? So Josh, I think you touched on that as far as the 22-hour rule, assuming you file more than that. Is that true across the board?
Exactly. So if you file a flight plan in ForeFlight, say 48 hours ahead of time, 22 hours before departure, the flight plan gets sent to the FAA. If you file within a 22-hour window, say 16 hours before or 1 hour before, it's sent to the FAA right away.
Perfect. Next one here is, could you please cover your preferred method for accessing or seeing FIR information? I use JEP-FD internationally because of the ball notes as Jeppesen, or that Jeppesen uses to highlight the FIRs you're crossing. So who has a preferred method of checking FIR information that they could share?
I find the easiest way to check FIR information is simply pressing on the map. If you wouldn't mind pressing on a map, Sam, either in Europe or over North America, and we could see we have the New York FIR. We can get details on, and depending which FAR we are talking about, we can get everything from information on what are the entry requirements, what frequencies do we use, any special procedures, the limitations altitude-wise of the FIR, and same such info that you would expect out of a Jeppesen solution.
Yeah, and this feature is especially useful if the airspace you're entering has very strict requirements. So for example, if I check the Cuba FIR, you'll see there all of the routing procedures, prior notification requirements, and all of that is listed right here in the pop-up. So this is the best way to find FIR information right from the map.
It's also extremely useful if doing a crossing over the ocean or up in Canada where CPDLC is readily available. By simply hard pressing on any one of the FIR boundaries up in Canada or over the Atlantic, you'll quickly see CPDLC services. You can log in and what the address for that login is.
Yeah, and I should point out that all of this information is coming directly from Jeppesen. And so if you're used to the information that JEP-FD provides for FIRs, then you can rest assured you're going to find pretty much the exact same information here because it's coming directly from them. So there's another question regarding sharing. It seems we got a lot of questions like that. How do you share flight plans and nav logs with another pilot, or can you only share it when they are with you? So rather than simply sharing, doing the cockpit sharing, as Brent pointed out, you can also use the send to button from up here. And this allows you to share or actually, let's see, if we tap into nav log, then from here, you can email, in addition to sending it to your own documents, you can email it or text it or airdrop it to someone. So that's an easy way to share specific documents. And I believe if you do share PDF, that will also share all of those details.
One other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is when you file a flight plan, if you don't mind going to the file form, Sam, and as we scroll to the bottom, we have email addresses, and we can separate each email address with a comma, and all the email addresses that are listed in that field will receive the routing, expected routes, any notifications you might normally receive when you file a flight plan. By adding a comma and another email address, another one will get that as well.
We've had a number of questions about the some of the virtual waypoints, as we call them, that appear in the nav log when you have waypoints that are separated by more than 100 nautical miles. So for example, if I just delete this route, and so I just have a direct route, if I go and check the nav log again, oh, and I got to refresh it, then what we do is we just add these 800 minus, 700 minus, 600 minus. So we add these little, every 100 nautical miles, we add a little virtual waypoint. So does one of you want to speak to the purpose of those and the reason that we have them there?
The purpose of those 100 nautical mile waypoints is essentially where I find them useful is it's much better data. A lot of us are used to following flight plans that maybe have 800 miles before waypoints or between waypoints. And using that, let's just say you have LAX VOR and let's say another VOR in Albuquerque. If you don't have those 100-mile waypoints, you're going to get the wind and temperature data for the VOR in California and the one in New Mexico, but you're going to get nothing in between. And most of us have seen many times over several hundred miles, the ISO deviation can change quite a bit. Winds can change quite a bit. You can do more refined fuel planning if you see every 100 miles, how is my fuel burn lining up relative to what I flight planned or what my flight plan is based off of. So it's essentially a source of getting better, more accurate information over a shorter period of time.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, the purpose is mostly just to give you more granular information, as Josh said. Another question is, can we add a functionality to add files to flights in the web browser? And so that's another one of these features that is available with ForeFlight Dispatch. If I go ahead and bring up a dispatch window here and just go look at one of these flights, what you can do here is go over to the Files tab, and you can drag and drop any files that you want to share with the crew members directly from your browser, and those will be added to that Files tab within ForeFlight. So if you want to be able to share files with pilots and not have to rely on them to add them to their own flight plan, then Dispatch is the way to go, because we've built this to be incredibly seamless and fast. Right, so next up is the turbulence chart only available through the Dispatch service plan? And the answer to that is no. Those charts that you were seeing in the briefing that I was showing earlier, those are available with all plans right now. Now, the international Nav Log is only available with, not with Dispatch, but with ForeFlight Performance. But for example, the vertical cross-section chart that we were talking about, this chart here, this is available with all performance plans on both of the briefing formats now, the HTML briefing and the PDF briefing.
And Sam, this is Mike Matzis. On the maps page, there also is the global turbulence and US turbulence. And a lot of times I bring that up if there's not a lot of convective activity going on. The auto function finds my altitude perfectly fine, and the turbulence is spot on. I mean, you can almost set your hand to the switch as far as how accurate that turbulence map is.
Yeah, both this feature for turbulence and also for icing, both for the US and globally, these are included in ForeFlight Performance. And as you said, these are great planning tools for just getting a sense of what kind of icing and turbulence you can expect. And if you're connected to ADSB, then you also get ADSB icing and turbulence, and those don't require any subscription level. I think even if you're on like a pro plan, you're still going to get those with ADSB. Another question, now that we're on the topic of weather layers, someone asked, how does radar tilt and composite differ? So they're referring to the radar composite and radar lowest tilt up there at the top.
I'll go ahead and answer that. This is Tom. So radar composite is kind of the big picture look at the storms. I actually like going between composite and lowest tilt. Lowest tilt is going to give you a better sense of where precipitation is actually happening. Depending on what storm you're looking at, it may not look that different, but it's a good way for you to see where's the actual rain in this storm and just gives you another layer, another look at the storm. While we're talking about different looks at a storm, I'll give a brief plug for the Sentry. So I fly, my primary panel is a Garmin G3000 where I get XM radar in flight, but I also fly with the Sentry, which gives me access to the ADS-B network and the NEXRAD radar. So I'm a big advocate for that. It lets me look at a storm in 2 different ways when I'm coming up on it. So that way I can get a sense of where the strong cells from the storm are, and maybe where there are parts that are a little safer to fly through, or the parts that I should definitely avoid. It also gives me a traffic layer, which is a great backup system to the panel.
Yeah, using Sentry as a backup source for weather, especially like you said, when you can combine it with XM, it's really giving you the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and you get that with the onboard radar, then that's 3 different ways that you can look at a storm. And you know, anytime you're around weather, you want to be as sure as you can what you're actually getting yourself into.
Exactly. Another question related to composite radar. Is that layer available on the map over the Atlantic Ocean? And what about, other than the Atlantic Ocean, what about worldwide? Where is that available? So I can go ahead and take that. Other than the US, and in fact, we have a setting now that you can turn on if you go to Map Settings menu. If anyone hasn't ever looked at this menu, you're missing out on quite a lot, because I've talked to people sometimes who don't know that this exists, and I'd say this has a huge amount of settings and additional map overlays that you definitely want to be using, or at least get a sense of what they do during a flight. So definitely check this out. The particular setting is down here at the bottom, this internet radar coverage. If I turn that on, it'll put cross-hatching over all the areas where the radar or any other map layer is not available. So this gives a really clear sense of where the boundaries of radar are. So, you know, between the continental US and Alaska, you have a little gap right there. And if you go and look at some of these other places, we have radar for Japan. We have radar for much of Australia. And we have radar for Europe. And doesn't cover all of Europe, but most of Central and Western Europe and parts of Northern Europe are covered. So you won't get composite radar over the Atlantic, but you will get it in all of those other places. And that doesn't include lowest tilt. Lowest tilt, I believe, is really only for the US and maybe Australia.
You know, in talking about flying, Sam, we got a very important question, I think. The question is, if you follow a flight plan today and tomorrow, what is ForeFlight doing? Is it updating? Is it not updating? And the answer to that question is, if you go into your Flights tab and open the flight in question, there's a refresh button on the right-hand side towards the top. And if we press the refresh button, that's recomputing for the latest available winds for the time period of your flight. So you can flight plan 2 or 3 days ahead, get forecast winds 2 weeks ahead, get predicted winds, you know, historical winds, or you can do any one of those 2 and immediately prior to the flight do a refresh and get the winds that are going to impact your flight, winds and temperatures that will impact your flight.
Yeah, that's a really important point about making sure to refresh your flight plan if you planned it ways in advance. Once you come back to it, it's not going to have the most up-to-date information unless you refresh it, or if you change any of the details of the flight plan, then it'll automatically refresh. But obviously that's critical for getting the most up-to-date information. There's another question here. Are track messages included on the briefing or Nav Log anywhere? And someone can answer that specifically, but I will say that we do have track messages included on the map. So unfortunately, there's only 2 tracks right now. not a lot of air traffic going back and forth there. But if you tap on one of these tracks, then it'll give you the message and the remarks for that track. So these are available from the maps view.
Yeah, and track message are something that you do get as part of your dispatch briefing.
All right. I see that there's still a ton of unanswered questions, but we are 15 minutes over time now. So I think it's about time that we wrap it up. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you learned something interesting about ForeFlight, about using ForeFlight with jet flying, like all of our guests here do. So we'll go ahead and walk us out here. I should have put this up earlier, but we were just doing Q&A. So if you want to learn more about ForeFlight, I would recommend going to foreflight.com/performance. That's where many of the features we've been talking about on this call are included with that plan. And so that page provides details about all of those features. It has lots of videos for those features. So if you're interested in things like PDC, the recall number, the icing and turbulence layers, and things like that, the international Nav Log, go check those out, and you can learn all about them on that page. As far as videos, we also have our video library. That's at foreflight.com/videos. Every time we come out with an important new feature, we make a video for it. And so if you're looking to learn more about ForeFlight, that is by far the best place you can go to do so. This webinar is part of our On Frequency webinar series. And so if you're interested in watching other future webinars or registering for those, just go to foreflight.com/onfrequency. And we will also put up a recording of this webinar either today or tomorrow. So if you want to watch it again, if anyone had to step out early or you got here late, or you have a friend that you want to watch this as well, you can go there and watch the video. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about ForeFlight performance, or not simply if you're interested, but if you're interested in demoing it, learning more about it directly from one of our sales reps, you can email sales@foreflight.com and they will get you set up with a trial. They'll give you a call and give you an over-the-phone demo. So that's the best way to get started with this. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you for all of our panelists for joining and providing some insight into your expertise with ForeFlight. I want to say that we do have a survey that will happen right after I close out this webinar. So for all of you watching, if you wouldn't mind taking just 1 minute or so to fill that out and let us know what you thought of the webinar and what you might want to see in future webinars, please go ahead and do that. We do look at those, and we do use those to determine what we're going to do in the future. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on the next webinar.